morning.
Hello.
Welcome. Now, the reason I was, Josie, just before you look like you've cut your hair. Have you merely used a different comb this morning?
I haven't used the comb. I used my hands and just smushed it onto my head. And luckily, the accumulated grease is a kind of gloss styling effect.
It's really good because I'm thoroughly enjoying home haircuts from people at the moment. There's a lot of people that I've interviewed who I think the general, I don't know if you found the pattern of it so far, the Mohican has been taken up by a lot of late middle-aged men who still have hair, have gone, wow, by the time this is all over, it'll have grown back. And yeah, there's now too many of the Mohicans. It's ruined Daniel Day-Lewis's film for me. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm in this lovely place where, because the last couple of days were hard and I woke up today feeling good, it's astonishing. Just that fluctuation feels wonderful. I'm good. Me and Johnny and Paddy last night made a video for a Eurovision Song Contest that we're participating in tomorrow night. And our song representing North Macedonia is called No Sun, No Fun, No Problem. And
oh, nice.
It is utterly bizarre. That's all I can say.
Well, that's very much it. Because who was there someone called Guido or something like that one year in the Eurovision who was like this kind of slightly Viking-esque Teutonic musician who everyone got rather cross about. They were very confused by why Germany in particular had decided to go with this. I mean, wonderful, fascinating. But I think some people were worried that they were almost parodying the Eurovision Song Contest, and it should always be dealt with, as we know, by each country with the greatest respect.
Great seriousness. Do you know what's frustrating is I'm such a fan of the Eurovision Song Contest, and I feel as if I ought to know instantly. Like, I feel like a better person will go, of course, 2014, that was Hans,
hands, knees, and boomsay days, and they
exactly.
Yeah. I've never got it. I have to admit, the Eurovision Song Contest. I know in the last 10 years, an enormous number of people now. It's gone beyond irony. It's become this new thing. To be honest, it's not a long, boring Swedish film, and so I don't watch it. Those are my rules. Long, boring films.
But there is always a Swedish part of it, and that should at least give you some succour.
Yeah, well, you know what the Swedish part I watched, though, yesterday? I watched the film Midsummer again.
Oh, now, how do you feel about it?
I think it's a great film. I think he's a fascinating director. I think Ari Aster, isn't it, who also did Hereditary. I don't know what, in terms of dealing with what is going on in humanity and the possibilities and the paganism and all of those ideas. I find it. I mean, I find the sledgehammering moments to it a little bit full on. I won't tell you what that bit is, but it's a sledgehammer.
I've seen it all.
But no, I like it. I think it's a really interesting and it has that uncanniness, and you do feel that you're immersed in that world.
Yes, but I mean, I 100% read that as a revenge fantasy for 25-year-old women who've dated too many jerks. The whole film. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, apparently the director's cut. That guy's even more of a jerk. Yeah. My mate,
any more of a jerk. That for me, like, the whole thing was just about that central relationship and about kind of people moving on from that. Cool.
Florence Pugh is amazing. Florence Pugh and everything that I've seen her in. Little Women, Wrestling with My Family, and Midsummer. She's great in all of them. We should mention, because otherwise Trent will be very, very cross, we should first of all mention who we have on today and also the tip jar. So we're joined again by Professor Richard Wiseman, who's going to be talking about his pop-up book work, psychology, and anything else he requires as well. And possibly also we might talk a little bit about, because we didn't last time very much, about his most recent book, which was about the psychology of ground control on the Apollo missions. We also have Pragya Agarwal, who's written a fantastic book, which I thoroughly enjoyed, Unraveling Unconscious Bias, Sway. So we're going to talk about her book, Sway. We also have Uncle Frank, who has two songs for us, and very, very, they're wonderful songs as well, and they have a level of joyousness that might be required. Uncle Frank, some of you might have known, also used to be in Fun Loving Criminals, and his current work is lovely. So we have some of that, and all of that put together means pop a pound in our tip jar at some point.
I was just about to. was just about to say we have a tip jar. If you've got £1, please consider dropping it in because we're pooling together to fund comedians and to help support the comedy industry, which otherwise is very threatened. Also, I just wanted to say,
musicians as well, and musicians, and some jugglers too. Some musicians, some jugglers.
They're the only ones that it's difficult. The other ones, anyway. But Bandcamp today have waived all their fees. So if you've ever had an artist or a musician, even some comedians have albums on Bandcamp. If you have a performer that you love or a creator that you love, today's the day to buy their work on Bandcamp because they'll see all of it and not just some of it.
Yeah, and if you tweet me if you want to recommend or anything like that, or you are in a band you want to recommend, I'm trying to, as much as possible, retweet everyone and listen to as much music as possible today as well. Should we have Richard join us for
let's do it.
Today's show and tell? Oh, I'll do one little bit more of housekeeping, which is this weekend. Tonight is the Quarantine Comedy Club, isn't it, Josie?
8:30, me, John Luke Roberts, Sophie Duca, Barbara Nice, and Johnny and the Baptists. It'll be really, really fun tonight.
We should mention that Johnny and the Baptists have work on Bandcamp as well. So,
I should have known that.
Yeah, you should have known that your partner will possibly profit from Bandcamp's Bandcamp Friday. On Saturday, we have at 11 a.m. we have the Children's Science Club, and that's Helen Chersky and Sheila Kanani and Simon Watt and Ginny Smith and Johnny Berliner. And on Sunday at 3 p.m. We have another Sunday Science Q&A, and we have Adam Rutherford on that, and whose most recent book was How to Argue with the Racist, and before that Book of Humans, which is a very interesting book about human exceptionalism, myth, truth, whatever, somewhere in between. In biology, normally it's somewhere in between. And we also have Hugh Warwick, who will be talking about hedgehog awareness.
Oh, the best!
Yeah, Hedgehog Awareness Week. And Lucy Cook, who wrote the book Truth About Animals, will be with us, and Helen Chersky as well. So all those things. And then finally, next week, we're having a slight change in the shows. Monday, Thursday and Friday, we'll be starting at 10:30 to do some show and tells with people and go and check who we've got. And then Tuesday and Wednesday is normal as well. So now over to Professor Richard Wiseman, pop-up book artist. Wiseman, how are you? Pop-up book artist, how are you?
Hello.
It's another beautiful sunny day here in Scotland, and as ever, and I'm doing well. Yes, are you well?
Yeah, have you, as a psychologist, are you enjoying this period of time to examine humanity now in isolation, and the fact you don't have to meet them? You know, you can now just observe them via social media or other systems. You don't have to take them into your laboratory. Are you enjoying, in some ways, the homework of seeing how humans react in what is a very strange situation for many people?
No. I think like everyone else, it's causing lots of issues out there. It's kind of interesting, I think, in terms of change. I'm interested in change, and people are being forced to do some things differently. We shouldn't forget, for some people, it's a horrible, stressful time. But for other people who are fine and so on, one wonders when the real world comes back, as it will at some point, how that's all going to impact on things. So I think that's interesting. I'm fascinated, like everyone, by the news, the rolling news, and other than that, it's made no difference to my life at all. I normally work from home. I don't meet people. They don't want to meet me. And I actually didn't notice there'd been a lockdown until 3 weeks into it.
So it's your family, but not you. That's good.
I went into social isolation. I managed a meeting very early on with two people that then tested positive. So I actually went into proper social isolation for 10 days. They were delighted. They asked, the only group that asked to extend these. The doctors were saying there's no need. They said, surely it's better to be better safe than sorry. So it's the very first day out of social isolation. It's lovely to see somebody.
See, that's what I find delightful, is the fact that, you know, as a social, the main reason you study it is, why on earth do people socialise? You know, this is ridiculous.
The psychologists study the one thing they themselves have got the biggest deficit in. People, they can't remember a thing. You meet the personality folks, well, that explains everything. So, yeah.
This is like comedians, the whole comedians are miserable off stage thing. You know, you're getting it done in your work.
Most of them as well. So so psychologists, so social psychology. I do find some stuff interesting. How you alter behaviour is really interesting, and what it requires. Particularly amongst joggers, for example, who just don't seem to understand any concept of distance at all under any circumstances. So I find that stuff interesting. I go out for my little walk during the day and I observe people, normally from a 2-metre distance, unless they're joggers, in which case it's a much closer study.
What I wanted to ask you was a few things really about things like, because this is such a, for most people, different time and sort of strange time, and it's lasted now so long. How long do you think it will take for people just to sort of not be thinking in the back of their mind, oh God, I better not go near that person? What, you know, once these things are relaxed, like how long do you think it would take for people to kind of deprogram themselves?
I think it's a very good question, isn't it? I think what's astonishing is how quickly we've got used to this. This is normal, and it shows how plastic we are. You know, much of my colleagues like to think that we're born certain ways and are not very changeable. Actually, one of the things that this has shown is, yet again, how adaptable we are. Now, I think it depends how long it takes. Let's imagine there's a year of this in various ways, maybe a year and a half. I think you'll see people doing things a different way, and some of those ways will turn out to be better. You know, already I've had meetings with 20, 30 people via the web, and you sort of think, well, actually, it's just as good as us all being in the same room. Yeah. So restrictions are lifted and go to all the hassle of all actually being in the same room. So I think that's where you'll see kind of big change amongst certain sort of pockets of the population. But the amazing thing is how quickly we've all kind of got used to it is what's...
I think at the other end it will be a similar thing. It won't be that people 20 years from now are like, no, I don't go near people.
I don't think it'll be 20 years. No, I think we'll get back to going near to people because that's a very human thing. But in terms of how we meet up, how we work, you know, maybe to some extent how we consume, all of those things, I think may undergo quite a shift. But I mean, the biggest thing, doom and gloom about it, but you've got a big recession coming. That's going to affect things far more than any of this. So, you know, we'll see. But right at the moment, what it speaks to is our astonishing ability to adapt. I mean, if we were dogs, you know, we'd be doing the same thing, and it would be mass extermination across the planet. You know, we should all go into lockdown and socially distance. Very hard to get them apart.
No, they wouldn't thrive.
They wouldn't thrive. They wouldn't be queuing up for food to the park. You never see dogs doing that.
This is so. I have another question for you, which is also me being like this, other thing, and this is complete anecdotal nonsense. But what I've seen from all of my friends is that this 6th week has been the hardest week emotionally in terms of all of it. And I was wondering if there is anything behind it that could explain why everyone I know at this 6-week juncture is falling apart.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to have a slightly different journey on that. Yeah. I think that any change, what you get is, oh, this is kind of interesting because it's different. Oh, we have to start doing things differently. That's kind of interesting and to some extent fun. And then you start to go, oh no, this is the new reality. This is how it's going to be. And I think once that penny drops, then you start to feel a bit better about it. So we like initial change because that feels rather exciting. And then you realise that that's how it's going to have to be, and that gets a little bit of a downer. And then once you accept that, once you embrace it, then actually I think you start to feel a bit better about it. So I think it's good to have global hope, that hope that things will get better eventually. What you don't want is too much day-to-day optimism. You don't, and it's going to be better tomorrow. It isn't. It will be better in the future, in the long term. But in the short term, you know, it's going to be a bit of a struggle, I think, is probably the best mindset for it.
I think that's definitely I'm finding it difficult because my whole MO is like, don't worry, tomorrow will be better. And also my whole way of coping with difficult people online is to think, well, look, I love my life and I love how I've managed to curate it. And if they are so unhappy they have to do this, whereas now I'm like, my life's probably worse than this. Oh God. Which is probably...
But also it depends on how I did a lot of work into luck and lucky people. And it all depends on who you compare yourself to. So some friends of mine are nurses, and quite frankly, they're terrified to go to work. Yeah. And so when I wake up, I think about them, and all I've got to do is sit around the house and do the work I do in a very safe manner. So it all depends on the comparison groups that you're using, I think.
Yeah, of course.
Also, I was just going to say, also, we've realised to have any spare space, if you see what I mean, because I know you talked about, Josie, you have a very small flat, you guys are very close together, to have any room or any corner that you can go into, to have any kind of and I hope that kind of remains in all of our heads, that thing that if you have a small patch of garden, you now go, wow, I used to think, oh, I can't do anything in this garden, it's tiny. And now I go, I have this patch. I have this, if the sun is out, I have a space in which I can just walk out safely. And I think things like that, it's going to be very interesting to see the different people those who that remains with them as actually something in terms of, this is a piece of good fortune and this helps me empathise with those who haven't got those things.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I mean, my parents were actually in the East End during the Blitz. Wow. And so for them, this is honestly a walk in the park. They're going, we go to sleep at night, we wake up, the house is still there. We didn't have that. And you go to sleep, you went back above ground, and you didn't know entire neighbourhoods were flattened and so on. So for them, they're doing that comparison. And again, that's a very much an upward comparison. Depends on who chooses your kind of other group, as it were.
Well, also just the fact that I am always very, very grateful that, thank God, we are not living in a war. Thank God, what is happening to us is not a case of human aggression and opposition and all of that kind of psychic torment to have to deal with. What we're dealing with is something that everybody is united is a bad thing that is not us, and the people who are fighting it aren't people who are going out harming other people. It's the opposite of that, and I feel so grateful for that.
Absolutely, we're all in this essentially, and I mean, actually, my parents were interesting again because when some of the sort of food issues started at the beginning, we were a little bit concerned about getting food. They went straight into rationing mode from the war, which was that on one day you ration and the next day you don't. So during the rationing day, you've got something to look forward to the next day. So they went into this kind of sort of mindset, which was sort of lurking in there and just came back out again. So I do find that fascinating.
Just have a banana. There we go. I know. Just showing off.
I haven't seen one of those since 1945.
That is one of the most grotesque stories of the story of Evelyn Waugh, who was known for not being necessarily the most pleasant human being to other human beings. When his during rationing during the Second World War, 5 bananas arrived at the house, and he called all his children down. And they all sat round the table, and then he peeled each banana, placed it in a bowl, covered it in cream and sugar, and ate each one in front of all of his children, and then said, "You can now go." That says really changes Brideshead Revisited for me. That awful thing to do. Have you got a show and tell for us today, Richard?
Oh my goodness! I've got a couple of things. Obviously, I've got the new pop-up books, which I know everyone's going to be very interested in. But I've also got this. I hope you can see it. It's a puzzle, and it's a piece of wood with a hole drilled in it, and another piece of wood that goes in there like that. And the challenge is to get this inner piece of wood out without touching either of them. Normally, that would be sitting on a table, and so you're not allowed to touch them, but you have to move this inner piece of wood out. And that's the puzzle. And I'm sure many of your viewers will know the answer. If not, I'll you blow across the top of it. So let me try and get this right. And that's astonishing. Impressive. That is. Hold on a minute. I'll give it a bit more puff. Look at that.
That was like being entertained by a hoop and a stick.
It's great. And if any of your viewers know the physics of that, perhaps they could post it, because I don't know why that happens, but it does happen most times as long as you get the angle right. My little wooden puzzle there.
I love it.
That's fantastic. That reminds me of I think it was one of those people that James Randi debunked. I forget his name now. Do you remember there was a guy who had an amazing power to make a pencil roll across things a bit? Yes. It was incredible. It was one of the great moments of the 70s. Oh my God, human beings didn't know they had the power to sometimes make a pencil roll a bit.
He was a white man, but he would wear a lot of sort of karate gear. And his shtick was he was sort of doing a kind of, I don't even know, like a martial arts that he'd invented, where he was like, and then the pencil would roll. James Heydrich, that's his name.
James Heydrich, and he was a martial arts expert. You don't want to argue with him. And why it went on so long is everyone just looks at it and says, "I'll take your word for it. That's psychic." But no, it's a great thing he did. He'd balance a pencil or a pen on the edge of a table, make these kind of movements around, and actually his methodology was really good. He'd worked it out on his own. And he got some nice stuff there where he'd even turn his head away and it would still move. It's great. Footage is still out there. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, it's such an I mean, that whole, I know we don't have time to talk about it now, but that whole moment in kind of skepticism and science during the heyday of telekinesis, where people were going, you really do need to have a close-up magician check on the powers of their mind, because there is a possibility. It's like having a seance with a bad ventriloquist. You do need a ventriloquist, because it might turn out that the only time the ghost is talking is when they're holding a mug quite near their mouth. Oh, come now for you, I'm the ghost of Eileen. Oh, I think that was the ghost of Eileen. No, but as a scientist, I'll be able to see through those tricks. You know what, Professor? I think you're missing something with our ventriloquist ghost.
I like the idea do you remember the old gag of the ventriloquist who's doing seances and everyone's really impressed and he's charging $20. And he said, actually, if you pay me $40, we have the whole seance and I'll be drinking a glass of water.
Josie, what's your...
I will get back to you on that.
It is difficult, isn't it? Because to be honest, now at the end of the fifth week, we are really grubbing around our house.
We're running out of stuff. We've shown everything and we've told everything.
Well, I've been trying to neaten some of my shelves for the books that actually have space on a shelf. Most of them, as you know, don't. And I found this.
Robin's on Instagram, and if you don't follow him, he's very, very good on it, and it's a real good representation of your interests and your general mood. Posting bookshelves, and they're great. They're so enticing.
Well, this is the thing, is just so people know the bookshelves they've seen, this is what I'm working with initially. So that gives you some sense.
Richard, what does this say about the man's psyche? What does this say?
well, yes, let's dig deep. No, I think there's been quite a lot of research into creativity and messiness in offices. And so people with messier offices, far more creative. So there we go.
As books knows, for anyone who edits a book knows, I've got a very creative author and it is a nightmare trying to get some form of narrative structure.
I'm so sorry to have interrupted them with that silliness. Would you keep showing us the show and tell, please?
Oh no, it was just when I was cleaning one of the, and I've been looking for this for ages and I don't know how this book is one of the books that kind of launched what was Clause 28 and became Section 28.
Oh, I remember, yes.
For those of you who are young and I'm sure many of you do know, it was basically, it was a kind of distraction technique by the government. It was one of those uses of kind of social fear to distract from the collapse of society.
Just throws a whole generation of people and their lives under the bus so that they get to do whatever they want.
And it was during another period of kind of homophobia in the UK as well. And so it was, Section 28 was the outlawing the promotion of homosexuality by teachers. And this was one of the books. This is one of the main books. This is Jenny Lives with Eric and Martin. And I can't remember which shop I picked this up in. And this book was talked about. Can you believe these books are everywhere?
Libraries.
Jenny, Eric, Martin, and this is when you're grown up, you can live together in different ways. Some women fall in love with a man and live together with him, and some men fall in love with a woman and live with her. But women do also fall in love with other women, and men do fall in love with other men. Oh my God!
I know, it's so bleak that just a very sweet, sensitive children. I mean, you see it now with what's happening.
Look at him with that egg in his mouth. I mean, that's the thing, is that everything about this book is entirely charming and sweet, and it's just kind of there. Look at them repairing a bicycle. That's what those men do. They're always repairing their bicycles, and it does. And of course, I think also the handy thing about books like this and remembering those stories is to remember that the media hasn't changed so much. Don't imagine that we're not still being sold dummies, because this book, which was apparently in every classroom, children were forced to reenact some of the scenes of bicycle repair, whatever it was. There was one copy of this in the Inner London Education Authority's Library of Resources. So it wasn't even in schools, but it was available. If someone requested it, there was this one copy of this book. And so I find, this is one of those interesting books which has a very rich cultural history about mistakes we've made and again remind.
Mistake is too generous. I think deliberate,
I mean the mistakes of those people who have been misled, rather than the government itself and the propaganda techniques. But I think as we see it now, we see it certain newspapers and many if you must never think that, oh, hang on a minute, lessons were learnt.
And can I say that there is actually at the moment Liz Truss, who's the new Equalities Minister, has been really, really hinting at her support for transphobes and for kind of damaging the rights of trans people, and particularly like focusing on this same kind of scare tactic about young people who are trans and it's something that if you are like us, you're trying to be an ally to trans people, it's worth finding out about it and seeing what you can do to be supportive, because it's exactly the same sort of arguments being used, and it's exactly the same sort of scandalized, awful stuff going on. So yeah, check it out.
Well, that's we have to use that slower thinking part of our mind. Is that true generally? I mean, this is what I think, Richard, is with a lot of things that we see on social media, and I think most of us fall prey to it. You see a certain clip of something, or you see a sentence, and your natural reaction is to go, oh well, that seems appalling, and your natural reaction is not immediately to find out the context and find out the information, and that seems to be one of the main problems, which is it will take a while quite often for Snopes or whoever it is to get to the bottom. And if it takes 2 days to get the correct information, then it's too late. It's moved on now to another kind of.
I think that's right. I mean, and of course, we only tend to do it when it disagrees with our viewpoint. So that can't be right. Then we look into it. Otherwise, we just let it go. But I think at the root of it is just the straight us and them, isn't it? It is just that very kind of deep-rooted thing we have about groups of people, and we want to be in one group and want another group over there. And I think you're better off just kind of getting rid of any sort of sense of us and them. There are good and bad to cut the pie, as it were. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of the whole sort of brand of psychology, which is individual differences, where they compare men and women or extroverts and introverts or any of these things. I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm much more interested in what happens when you put everyone together, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll look at that.
Saying you have to change and adapt means that, like, so often I feel like life is so fluid, and one life is so fluid. It's so ridiculous to be like, these extroverts.
Yes, that's right. Well, we did a kids show here, actually, based on psychology, positive psychology. And we worked with kids entertainers. And so much of that stuff, even at that young level, is let this side of the room versus this side of the room, girl versus boy, or whatever it is. And it was quite hard to come up with games and things that everyone worked together. And because a lot of them was about people sitting around working together to make one thing happen. They weren't quite so keen on splitting into teams. So it's kind of interesting.
What's the shift?
Well, I don't know what the shift was. I don't know. But I mean, Victorians were very hot on getting together, also in certain classes, and having a good time together. So that was very much the mindset. And the game we went to in the end was we got one kid up on stage, we blindfolded them, we hid an object on someone on the stage, took the blindfold off, and everyone had to applaud. When the kid got near to the object, they applauded and cheered more. When they got further away, they went quiet. So the whole audience were helping the kid on stage. And you could feel the difference in the room versus the. So that's a psychology I find interesting, stuff that makes a real difference.
Well, hopefully we will be talking about some of those and unconscious biases and those things in a moment with Pragya Agarwal and talking about her book Sway. Before that, we are going to go and have the first of two songs today from Uncle Frank, who I mentioned before. Uncle Frank, who I use the past tense for Fun Loving Criminals. Fun Loving Criminals do actually still gig as well when he's not doing his own work. They do sometimes get back together and do gigs. So we're going to go over to Uncle Frank and just remind you as well. Again, the tip jar at the bottom of this. This is a resource that we're trying to create for various artists and art institutions. So let's now see Uncle Frank.
Hey, Frank here. Me and my music partner Naia are about to perform a couple of songs using this technology, crazy stuff. It's great to put technology to good use, but I just want to say to everybody out there, if you've been staying in, keeping safe, making sure our amazing NHS has been dealing with this problem, which they are. They're just fantastic. We want to just say big love from Uncle Frank. We're going to be playing two of our old tracks to put a smile on your face. One's called Something Something, one's called Whoopee With You. And we just not long released a new album called Soul on the Battleground. We've got a brand new acoustic EP, a little bit like what we're doing now. It's coming out on the bank holiday of May 29th, and it's our live recordings from our very own Tiki Hut. So I hope you enjoy that. Plenty there for you to listen to while you're staying in. But just big love. You can get everything you want to get from www.unclefrankband.com. Hope you enjoy.
Something, something. 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's been so long since I liked anyone. Since I met you, your sentence is a song. How are my words ever to rhyme without you? Like a scarf is knitted, I feel so entwined. Custom made and fitted with just me and mine. Why do I feel so cold without you, yeah? 'Cause my friends say friend, yeah. Falling in love all alone. Tell me, friend, yeah, I have a little something of my own. So you think I'm trouble? At least that's what I heard. You still like me if you knew I was a nerd. Every night I'll be painting a portrait of you. My friends say, Frank, falling in love all alone. Tell me, Frank, yeah, I have a little something, just something of my own. Yeah, a little something, little something of my own. Say Frank, falling in love all alone. Tell me, Frank, yeah, have a little something, just something of my own. Yeah, a little something of my own.
Hello, welcome back. That was Uncle Frank, and Uncle Frank. We've got another song from Uncle Frank later on, and so that was a lovely song and beautifully put together. Because I have noticed, and I don't have a problem with it, but a lot of people are putting together songs with all of their friends from various bands just by filming each other on the phone to support things, and the quality is not always great in the same way as the quality of this is not always great. Our intention is good, But so that was lovely to actually see someone who'd managed to get a level of such excellent production. So now we're joined by Pragya Agarwal, who's written this book, which I've mentioned before, which I have read, which I think is fantastic. And so this is for you, this must be a strange time where I know with a lot of authors, that moment of going, my book's about to come out and there's no bookshop. So have you found lots of different ways of at least, because I know you've had some I've read some great stuff in the press and you've had some fantastic reviews for the book, but are you finding different ways of going, right, I'm going to find ways of exposing people to this book?
Yeah, it's been really funny because the book came out just as kind of the lockdown was starting, so all the events were cancelled and nobody was really knew what to do. So I think it's been great because people have been creative, and I had to do virtual talks and virtual events and make a big deal of my book and talk a lot more about it on social media, which I normally wouldn't. So I feel like I'm talking about it all the time, which is slightly odd. But I think it just, it's been great to have the support of the online community, and people are tweeting about it. So I think it's kind of shown also that we don't always have to do things face to face. There are other ways of doing it, other ways of doing things as well. But it was kind of sad to not see it on bookshelves and in windows and things like that, So yeah, it's mixed emotions.
On the plus side, there is that thing that sometimes you go to a bookshop and you find it's not on the shelf, and you find out that your enemy's book main table right at the front. And then, so again, in all these situations, finding the positive, sometimes you go, I don't know if it's just me, but has someone seen the Waterstones in Rickmansworth? I don't know, there is one there, but I can't find my book. And I'm just said it was going to be there. You have a wonderful quote in your introduction, which I think gives us some sense of the motivation of the book. And it's from Raymond Williams. And the quote is, "To be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing."
The best quote. I love that quote. Also, Raymond Williams, I think, is having a renaissance in terms of people reconnecting with his work. Sorry to jump in. Got excited.
No, go on. No, I think I love that, and I've got it on my office wall because I think I have a tendency sometimes to be quite negative about things. And when I was especially writing this book, I felt it can be quite depressing to studies with all the bias, racial bias, gender bias, age bias, everything. And at times I felt quite low, especially when I was writing it. I would feel this is really bleak and I don't know if there's any kind of hope for us all. But I think that kept me going because there is this feeling that if we acknowledge and reflect on some of these things, and if we talk about them, then it is a possibility that we are actually all able to make a change and all able to change our behaviors. And I think that I love that quote as well. So thanks for bringing that up.
Well, the book starts with I wonder if you can tell us a story of you biased judgments when you were in quite a precarious situation with one of your children.
Yeah. There's an example with one of the examples about gut instinct, where I talk about one of my twins who's now just recently turned 4. When she was just 1, she was quite ill, and she's been ill for 10 days. And every time we were sent back, and there's this feeling that as a parent, you're always overreacting. And I get a sense from the medical professionals. But that day, I just felt like I have to take her into the hospital. She doesn't look good. And I have this sense. And even my husband said, this is all okay. So I just rushed her into the nearest children's hospital, emergency. They just said, oh, again, she's here again talking about it, And so I write a lot in my book about the healthcare and medical diagnosis and treatment. And as a woman, sometimes you're not seen as your pain and suffering might be downplayed. There are research to show that racial bias exists as well. We women of color especially are seen as overreacting at times, and they might not get the same treatment. So I think all these factors compounded, and as a parent, sometimes you're seen that you have this positive bias towards your children, so you're going to be more concerned about them, and you might just be reacting more strongly. But on that occasion, they had to admit her, and within 5 minutes, she was going into sepsis shock. Her heart rate just spiked, and I still have kind of nightmares, and just talking about it give me shivers. So Yeah, I think on gut instinct, where I start with that example.
Well, this is it seems to be. Have you found, in doing the research for this book and writing this book, ways of addressing some? Because I think one of the problems is that we do think that we are rational. We think we've reached most of our positions from a kind of evidence-based position. We don't. You know, if someone does say that, oh, that might. Do you know what? I think that might actually be a little bit kind of racist, where that's come from, or misogynist, or whatever it might be. The natural reaction is to go, "How dare you? I'm not like that at all," because we're not aware of so many of those unconscious biases that come from all the things around us. So have you found different ways of being able to address it without the shutting down of conversation, which happens so often?
I think it has to be a two-way process. I think sometimes, as people who feel like under attack, like even by race, gender, age, it becomes their responsibility to educate other people about it. And I think that puts the onus on them, even in workplaces or in society. But I think all of us have a responsibility of educating ourselves. There's so many resources out there, and all of us have a responsibility of understanding that we are all biased. We all carry these biases. And Richard was talking about how children from a young age are put into these groups of us and them. And I think that's where it all starts, this kind of tribe mentality of othering people and finding that they don't belong to my tribe, so they're not like me. And I talk about that in my book as well, about the social development, how it occurs as well. And so I think we all have this, we are all biased. I am biased, and so are you. And everybody carry these biases because of the way we've been brought up, or what we've read and what we see in media. So I think just acknowledging that, I think, is a really big first step, and not being defensive about it. And I think putting yourself in the other person's shoes can be sometimes quite an empathetic response as well. When we start doing that, we can understand how the other person is feeling rather than being about us all the time, which is difficult, I know, in certain situations.
I was talking to my friend last night about my friend's from Missouri, and at the moment in Missouri there are these protests against the lockdown. And I contacted my friend because I wanted to just basically be like, I can't recognise these people. I don't understand where their thinking's coming from. And my friend was basically like, all I'm trying to do is give as much thought and understanding of how these people have got to where they are, and understand that actually everyone, the most we can do is understand that the systems themselves are the things we should be angry at, and not the people who are at their mercy, even when what those people are doing is absolutely shocking and awful to us. And like, how do you feel when you think about your book with regard to kind of like systemic change and things like that? Like, how do the two things relate, I suppose, going from personal to broader? Is that a really rangy question? I was like, I've got a point. Then I was like, have I got a point?
It's a difficult one, because I think a lot of these things are because of systemic and structural issues. And I think sometimes when we just talk about individual behaviors, we can forget that they are a manifestation or a result, as you say, of the systemic problems, the broader issues. We can't just say, oh, this person is being mean to me, or this person is. We sometimes forget that there are broader issues at play as well, you know. And I think both the discussions are valid and important, and both the acknowledgements are valid and important as well. So we are all a result of happening around us and the systemic issues, but we cannot use it as a get out clause. You know, we can sometimes say, oh, I just was brought up like this, or I just grew up and everybody around me is like that. So that's why I'm like, I use that as a get out clause. I grew up in India. It's very patriarchal society. And I think everybody was acting like that. So it's easy to say that's what the other person is doing. So why was the problem with me acting like this? You know, that's how it works. And so I think that's acknowledging that systemic thing, but knowing that sometimes we have to make individual change, systemic changes or structural changes, I feel is probably important.
It's like that difficult moment where with an elderly relative of going, do I bring this up now, or do I go, well, they are 84, aren't they? And that's those points, and that of course can change. You know, that bit where you go, do I allow this to pass or not? Or by doing that, does it also in some ways reinforce some of those things in me as well?
And how?
I've been. Sorry, go on, Josie.
Oh God, no! Please, you.
I was saying I've been in situations like that exactly, Robin, where I'm sitting and I'm thinking, oh, I'd be the one always shouting about these things, I'm really like this angry person who's always going on about, oh, what you said is probably not the right thing to say, or please do not say things like that. But there is a time and place for everything. But I think sometimes I do say that in my book as well, but it's not enough to sometimes not be racist ourselves. We have to be sometimes actively anti-racist or actively anti something. And unless we say that, unless we speak up, then things are not going to change, because we can make these changes within ourselves, but we also have a responsibility to kind of spread it around and change other people around us as well in some way. So.
And I think it can be difficult. Say you don't want to become somebody who other people view as very angry, or you don't want to be somebody who is condescending or dogmatic to people. But at the same time, I find if I encounter something and in my head I'm thinking, oh God, I have to say something about that. That's, something I really, really disagree and think is wrong. I find myself, if I'm trying to go softly with someone, I think, is this just manipulative and false? Because I'm not just saying, you've actually made me very angry with that. That's cruel. I'm saying, well, let's talk about this. And in my head, I'm thinking this is a chess game, And I think there's something to do with, persuading people and trying to change people's minds that feels still so complicated and difficult. Like, how do people get beyond it, I suppose?
I think it's, I hope that when we read more, it gives us vocabulary to talk about these things. We can support our arguments with other evidence, saying it's not just me who's got angry about it, or it's not just me who's felt like this. There is enough research or other examples to show that this is not the right thing to say, or this is what's happening in broader society, or this is actually not just one example, one offhand example, but there are other things that are going on about it. And I hope that kind of reading Sway, but also other books that have come out recently, give people vocabulary to deal with these things, these kind of really complex issues, but also these debates and discussions as well. And sometimes it's okay to say, yes, it's made me angry. I do think that, because I think it's valid and relevant to show that, yes, it has made me angry and I'm angry by this. And I think sometimes it can get complicated, not just with relatives, but also in workplaces as well. How do you tell your work colleague that what you're doing is not just a joke, it's actually making me angry? And I think it's important to maybe do it softly at times, but there is a time and place for it. And if a person doesn't really acknowledge this, then either you bombard them with a lot of information and lots of emails and say, this is it, read this. Another strategy. But or you can just give them some books to read, or just create a non-judgmental space to talk about these things and say, okay, I'm not going to judge you, you don't judge me. Let's have a discussion about why you feel like that and why I feel like this, if that person's really important to you, I suppose. And I think there are different ways we can do that. Just figuring out is sometimes tricky.
That's what I mean. What Richard was saying earlier as well about this kind of that everything is set up as combat. So much of education is this side and that side, and I'm sure all of us have had different. I mean, I remember a few years ago where I'd always get asked, would I come and debate with someone who was religious? And I said, why don't we just have a conversation on stage? Because otherwise, the debate seems to me to just be at the end of it. It doesn't matter about whether anything's been learnt or we've got new information. Who won? Who won? That's all that it seems to be about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's happening in social media, isn't it? And I think it's happening in social media, isn't it, at the moment? That's kind of real life and social media playing in each other, because in social media, if somebody says something that you don't agree with, it's not part of my tribe. It's not part of, I'm just going to put that person, or there's no sense of like a halfway measure or just talking about things and, discussing things.
But even those,
you're right.
Twitter is not designed to allow that, is it? It's designed to be like this.
I have been trying to explain that for some time to people, that it's not a 280 characters. It does not therefore make an arena for effective social or political debate. It makes an effective arena to go, have you seen this? This is fun. I've taken a picture of that. Here's the joke. It's short.
I would also like to say blocking is self-care in a pandemic. And if people are trying to rile you up, you block everyone and have no regret. Yes, I think, people being sort of positioned as in opposition constantly, and that being the news discourse, and the idea that constantly there should be this false notion of two opposing sides that are entirely opposed. And yeah, you can come in. Sorry, mate.
This is normally this late stage. I'll tell you what, we will. One thing, but you were talking about increasing vocabulary, and I always love, in books, I'm always circling words that I've never heard before. And you write a little bit early on about stand-ups, and this word, which I will now mispronounce, which is paraproduskian. Paraproduskian?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yes, I think so.
So it turns out Josie and me have been paraproduskian knights for years. What is this?
It's about how you propose an argument, I think, and I to remember now because I wrote it last year, and I'm not a stand-up comedian, so I'm constantly have people pick up these little things from my mind myself. Oh, what did I write? Did I actually write that? No, but it's about creating this kind of tension, and then playing on people's sense of like inner bias, I suppose, and then contradicting it immediately to create humor or something, isn't it? That's what people are doing. A lot of stand-up comedians do. They but in real life sometimes there's not this opportunity because we're all not like that. So I suppose Josie does that a lot as well.
Yeah, she's in mute at the moment while
sorry, I'm listening. I've just got my daughter here who might interrupt a little bit, everyone, yes, well done, darling.
This is basically our alarm clock. On a TV show, there's a floor manager. It's basically Josie's daughter will just go, I think, Mum, you'll find out that this is actually your time of doing this is finished now. Thank you. And there are dinosaur games to be had. So we will have, this seems like the right time to, I will quickly, by the way, again, there, let's both show there. This book, Sway, it's a wonderful book. And it's a very useful book. I think I mentioned that when we first spoke about it, when I read it. It's a book that gives you homework to do and to be active with the ideas that are in it, I think, and it's great. So Sway, Unraveling Unconscious, and you can buy. I should tell as well. Obviously, there are the kind of the big institutions where you can still get books, but a lot of independent bookshops, the Newham Bookshop, Big Green Bookshop, lots of other ones they're still able to get books for you. They will send books out to you. Try and keep those independent bookshops, which are struggling so much anyway, going as well. So
and can I give a shout out to Pages of Hackney, who've been delivering their stock via bike all around the borough of Hackney. I'm so sorry about that. Sometimes
it's expected at least twice a week, and that's fine. That was the second time on Friday, and we're finished, so it's not a problem. But we can't finish without. There's been a lot of questions about how Richard Wiseman's pop-up book work has been going.
Yes, of course.
So, Richard, can we see now? 2 weeks ago. So I'm fascinated to know where we've gotten those 2 weeks artistically.
Absolutely. Very quickly, just on that thing of changing people's minds. Dale Carnegie, who's a fantastic writer, he had this great thing of giving people a reputation. So what he'd do is, someone was always late. The one time they arrived early for something, he'd say, "What's great about you is you're always on time," and it gives them this kind of reputation. And so it's actually quite a neat way of getting in there, as long as you don't, because they end up believing it. And then they live up to it. So it's kind of an interesting one. If you just see the tiny little slither of hope, you see the great thing about you is you're not at all judgmental. And then that grows in their head, giving people a reputation. I rather liked it. Anyway, pop-up books. This is the one I showed you the other day. Josie, I don't think you saw this. I mean,
does this mean that whenever you give someone a compliment, what you mean is the opposite, and you're hoping they aspire to it?
That, with me, yes, that's right. That's true. Everything I say. So I was always embarrassed about this. I have no artistic ability at all. But this is my boat that I showed the other day, And then I've made 2 more since then. This is my online pop-up course that I'm not very good at all. This is a rotating platform. I hope this comes out okay. Are we ready?
Oh.
Look at that. It all goes into the card like that. Man in a bed. Hope you can see that. There we go. So that's rubbish. And
it's fun. What a lovely thing to be doing.
Well, yeah, well, that's very kind. It's like that's the same tone of voice as you talking to your daughter.
The good thing is that you're an expert craftsperson.
Thank you. And this one, I've invented this one myself. It's got 3 elements. I'll talk you through because I do like magic. And so this comes up here. Look at that. And it's a rabbit in a top hat with a wizard behind.
Yeah.
And technically, that's a floating platform, a box, and 2 V-folds on there. And there we go. So I can't believe anyone could do any better than this. But my challenge to your guests and viewers, to me, these are absolutely perfect. So I can't imagine anyone could do any better. But that's how I've been spending my time.
I'm really impressed by them. I can't wait for that new book. I have been waiting for you to. I've been so. There's a point where I thought there's enough psychology books from Richard Wiseman. When will he move on to doing a sequel to Jan Pienkowski's The Haunted House? Now is the time. Thank you so much for joining us again, Richard. Thank you so much, Pragya, as well as we mentioned this wonderful book, and also mention Richard's most recent book, which was is, as I mentioned before, we were hoping to get time to talk about it, which is all about the ground control, the Apollo missions, and the psychology behind that. And also Quirkology. There's lots of great books that Richard's written. Night School is very useful for everyone who's having any problems with sleeping at the moment. That's a great book as well. Thank you very much, everyone. Josie is back tonight at 8:30.
Quarantine Comedy Club. Lots of fun. I've actually got 3 new ideas this week, which is more than I've had in the past 6 weeks. So and they'll all bomb as well.
But you won't know they'll bomb.
No, that's true.
That's the thing.
I need to change my thinking, I think. Isn't that good?
I found it weird. I did one the other day for a place called the Bavard Bar down in Hastings in Alive. And when I was doing my kind of 25 minutes, all that was on screen was me looking at myself, which is a really weird thing to be performing and seeing yourself 1 second later there and trying to, it was, I've realised what a lot of people have been putting up with now for 30 years watching my shows. I'm so sorry. I will resign.
Oh, no, I just mean no one wants to see themselves the whole time.
No, but I've realised I've been inflicting things on people that I really shouldn't have been doing that. Thank you very much for everyone who's been able to tip today. I realise that a lot of you will not be able to do that, but if you are able to tip today, as we said, we're building up a resource and a fund for the arts, which we are hoping to distribute more money to a lot of also the local arts centres, which we're around the UK. And we're going to end on Uncle Frank. So we'll see some of you tonight, Quarantine Comedy Club, 2 science shows over the weekend, and then back on Monday at the new time the sometimes new time of 10:30. Bye.
Bye.
Whoopee with you. 1, 2.
1, 2, 3. Ooh, yeah. Nah. Woo. You could be the one I fall in love with. You could be the one that I call my own. You could be the one way out there in the zone. Yeah, you could be a lot of them things. Ain't nobody gonna change my mind. Alright. You could be the kiss that lasts forever. Throw the dagger bone, you watch it stay away. You could be the rock I crash my big heart upon. Yeah, you could be the one for me. Ain't nobody gonna change my mind. Alright, wait. One for me, ain't nobody gonna change my mind. And when it comes to making whoopee with you, well, I'm gonna take my time. Bum, 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 bum,
Here we go. Yeah, you could be the one for me. Ain't nobody gonna change my mind. Cause when it comes to making whoopee with you, what's he gonna do? Well, we're gonna take our time.